Why take one vacation with the family when you could take all of them? With Royal Caribbean, you don't just go to the beach. You visit a private island and race down the tallest water slide in North America. You don't just go for a road trip. You ATV and zip line through the jungle. You don't just go somewhere new. You rappel down waterfalls and discover ancient temples. Because this isn't just any vacation. This is all the vacations. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Ships Registry, Bahamas.
This episode is brought to you by Pepsi Wild Cherry. Pepsi Wild Cherry is bursting with delicious cherry flavor and a sweet, crisp taste that gives you more to go wild for. Getting wild may look different these days, but whether it's opting for a solo Friday binge watch or a big night out, everyone can indulge in their wild side with Pepsi Wild Cherry. Also available in Zero Sugar. So grab a Pepsi Wild Cherry and get wild.
Hi there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode 566 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. I'm Jason Evans, here for your listening pleasure. Joining me, as always, my partner in crime, Donald Wine. Donald, it is Wednesday afternoon, a little after 3 o'clock. How you doing, my friend?
Doing all right. We still don't have a football coach. I know we might discuss that a little bit later.
Yep.
We have a bowl game, but also we have what feels like a big basketball game coming up on Saturday. It's not necessarily a big opponent, but we had a bad week last week in both Duke football and basketball. We want to right the ship this week, and it starts with Duke basketball on Saturday.
Yeah, no question about that. The Blue Devils will be playing the Charlotte 49ers this weekend, and we are here to give you a little preview of that. As Donald indicated, we'll also be talking a little bit of football stuff. There's some news about the NCAA we'll be getting into. All that's coming later. But we are the Duke Basketball Roundup. We start by rounding up the basketball news, and that, for the moment, focuses on Duke's game against Charlotte. I want to get something out of the way at the start, Donald, which is that the big question for this game for some folks, we haven't heard anything official from Duke about Tyrese Proctor. There's a lot of indications. I'm not going to get into sources and any of that other kind of stuff, but there's a lot of indications. There's a lot of talk that Tyrese Proctor may be out for a prolonged period of time. Whether that means a couple weeks, whether that means a couple months, we don't know. I'm not sure anyone at Duke necessarily even knows, but I am very, very confident that Tyrese Proctor will not be playing this weekend for the game against Charlotte. Before we get into Charlotte, I think that presents a significant opportunity / moment, whatever you want to call it, for Duke, because we got to figure out what we do with those minutes, with that role of leading the team. And to be clear, I don't necessarily know, what we did against Georgia Tech was Caleb Foster. Big old dose of lots of minutes for Caleb Foster. I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the long-term solution for Duke. Should we need and by long-term, I mean several weeks, however long it may be. I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the solution for Duke. And that has nothing to do with my belief in Caleb Foster or his ability to perform well for this team, but just in terms of allocating minutes, roles that guys play and things like that. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings about what do you think is going to happen to the Duke point guard situation with us losing 30 plus minutes of Tyrese Proctor?
You know what, Jason, it's hard to tell at this point. The reason why I say that is because,
dude, cop-out answer. Come on.
Well, no, it's about the fact that normally we would have had a game by now to kind of figure out where the chips are starting to lie a little bit. But this is the first time we've had like a full week off. Guys are going through the reading period for exams. They're also practicing, and we don't have a real, I mean, like you said, we know reports that he may be out for a little while, but what we do know is that it's unlikely he's playing on Saturday. So the question is who steps up, and it's hard to do that without kind of getting a grasp of what's going on in practice. And especially coming off of 2 losses where, point guard, or not necessarily point guard play, but just the play of the team has just been something that needed to be addressed. And I know we addressed quite a bit of that on the last episode. I think it will be a kind of running back point guard by committee, so to speak, because there's a lot of things that Tyrese Proctor does well that not one person can replace. I think you have the ball handling. That's one thing. You have the shooting ability. That's another thing. The ability to drive and create He's one of the guys that dishes the ball the best and distributes the ball the best. And that's something that has been lacking in this team the last few weeks. That's something we need to figure out who is going to step up, but also the leadership aspect of things. Jason, he was not just one of our captains that was on the floor. He was our demonstrative captain that was on the floor. And we talked about the dynamic of the three captains and what they all bring to the table. His was the fact that he was stepping up vocally and in using his leadership vocally to motivate the team. So I say that to say this could be a Jeremy Roach stepping up in the leadership department to be more vocal, Ryan Young to be more vocal when he's on the floor. You're talking about a Caleb Foster, Jeremy Kane handling the ball, taking shots. Jeremy Kane may step up a little bit as far as distributing. He's shown so far this season that he's able to do that fairly well. And the idea is for all of these guys, all these point guards, to be consistent. They need to be consistent. That is going to be the key to bridge this gap between Tyrese Proctor going down and Tyrese Proctor coming back. Is we need to have more consistent play. That's something that's plagued us all year so far. And that's the thing, again, that can improve the quickest. If you're consistent, a lot of things will fall into place. But it starts here on Saturday, and it's hard to say how they're going to go, even from the opening tip, with who is going to be in the starting lineup alongside Jeremy Roach.
So it's so funny. On our last podcast, you and I talked for a pretty good bit of time about someone who I said, oh, this guy is always overlooked, Jalen Blakes. And you didn't even mention Jalen Blakes. I actually think one of the things that will be needed to replace without Tyrese Proctor is defensive presence and intensity. Tyrese Proctor, I think, was our best among the starters perimeter defender. He was the guy who often got assigned to the best perimeter player on the opposing team. Now, I'm not saying that I expect Jalen Blakes to start, although I guess I wouldn't be completely shocked if it happened.
He did start that, when we had that run where he scored 19 points in a couple of games, he did start one of those games. And again, it wasn't that we were looking, like you said, we weren't looking necessarily for him to be in the lineup for the offensive output. It was more as you mentioned, the disorganized chaos for the organized chaos that he provides on defense.
Right. And again, I'm not saying that I think necessarily that he will start, but I think that you could see his minutes tick up a little bit. I mean, one of the challenges here with Tyrese Proctor going down is that the other guys that you would sort of think, you mentioned McCain, kind of a combo guard. Jeremy Roach came to Duke as a point guard, has been more of an off guard for the most part in his career, but he arrived at Duke as a point guard. Certainly Jalen Blakes is someone that you would peg as a point guard, but all three of those guys, for the most part this season, have played off the ball, while we've really almost exclusively seen Proctor and Foster as the only two traditional point guards. So I think one of the things that you may see, and again, you pointed out we don't have a game, we don't have a midweek game this week, so it gives Duke a little more time to develop things in practice. I think you will start to see one of those other guys moving more into a point guard role, at least backing up Caleb Foster. And then the other guy who I think may see his role enhanced, and we've seen this over the past several games, but I think you're going to see even more of him, is TJ Power. I think that the fact that you're opening up some backcourt minutes, and that sort of trickles down through the rest of the team, especially if Jared McCain, and Jeremy Roach aren't playing exclusively on the wing, there's some extra wing minutes. And we've seen, we saw the other day against Georgia Tech, when Jared McCain took a poor shot and didn't look like the game was coming to him well, the guy that John Shire looked over on the bench and called to immediately was TJ Power. And I think that, you may see TJ Power taking a larger and larger role in this Duke lineup as a result of us missing our point guard, which seems like a crazy, series of events, but that's what I think.
Jason, the other point that I want to make is something, and you and I are not the coach of Duke University, nor do we claim to be. However, having said that, if I was the coach at this point, the one thing that I would ask, whatever happens, right, whatever the rotation or the shift would be, I would ask that player or players try to fill in for Tyrese Proctor without sacrificing what they do best. And that is a hard thing to do when you are trying to replace a caliber, player the caliber of Tyrese Proctor. That always ends up being something where someone says, hey, we need to sacrifice this guy's shooting for his pass. We need to sacrifice this guy's passing for his defense. I want to stress that the reason why these guys are in contention to get more minutes on the floor is because of the things they do well. And so you want to make sure that what you are doing doesn't come at the expense of sacrifice things. For example, I don't want Jarrett McCain to not look for his shot and just be the ball handler, just be a passer. You want that because you don't want it to be where the other team again goes, oh, they've taken the ball away from him, so to speak, in the sense that they've taken him out of his own game. Let's exploit that. We want to make it where these guys are still able to do their thing, but they may have to have enhanced focuses or increased responsibilities.
All right. I like that. With that, let's get to the Charlotte 49ers for a moment, because as we always do, we need to look at our opponent and give them the full respect that they deserve. Charlotte actually is a pretty decent team. They're, I'd say they're about like Georgia Tech, in the metrics and the rankings and the such. And Duke just went out there and lost to Georgia Tech. So we could absolutely lose this team to Charlotte. They're ranked 115th in KenPom. They're right sort of in the second tier of the AAC conference, which is a fairly good conference. It's one of the top mid-major conferences out there. They're not quite Florida Atlantic, which is at the very top of it. They're not at that level, but they're in that sort of next tier in the conference. So this is a team that Duke should not take lightly. Donald, tell me a little bit about their schedule so far, who they've played and how they've done.
Jason, before we get into what they've done, the reason why them being in the American Athletic, that's an important thing, is that they're not going to be scared of us. They play, these are teams that are used to playing quality opponents. Even though we may be the highest quality opponent that they have on their schedule to date, this is definitely a team who's not going to be, blinded by the lights of Cameron, and they want to come in and do well, especially considering the fact that they're going up the road from Charlotte. They're only driving a couple hours on the bus to be in Cameron, to be a part of this and to try and, go back home with a win. So right now they're 5-3, and they have a couple of wins by 17 against Maine, Utah Valley by 17. They did beat George Mason by 5. They beat Georgia State by 8, and then Stetson by 23. That was the most recent win. Their losses.
By the way, George Mason's not bad. They're a fairly decent ball club. That's a nice win.
Yeah, George Mason, right down the road here in Fairfax, George Mason is a really, they can have some decent squads, and we know we've seen their Final Four runs back in the day under Jim Larrañaga, but they've had a decent squads ever since Larrañaga even made the trip down to Coral Gables. But their losses have come to Liberty by 12, UCF by 4 in overtime, which was actually a pretty decent game, and then crosstown rivals Davidson, they lost to them at home by 4. So these guys, again, even the games that they're losing, they're not losing by much. The Liberty game is the only one that really got away from them, and that was really right at the end.
By the way, Liberty is literally one of the best mid-majors in the country. That is a legit, like, top 50, top 60 team in all of college basketball. UCF is a team that has just joined the Big 12. Davidson's a program that's always good. None of these losses are embarrassing or losses that should give you, great pause in thinking about the quality of the Charlotte 49ers.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, I give back to you with this. The one thing about this team, as we start to look at the metrics and who these players are, is I want to lead with this. They're one of the taller teams in Division I. And because of that, they're going to be a matchup problem for a lot of teams. And even for us, you mentioned, we just talked about Tyrese Proctor for about 10 minutes about him not being in the game. That perimeter defense is going to be important, because the taller teams are, the more they want to get the ball inside, and they want it. And for us, we have to make sure our perimeter defense is on point to limit the number of entry passes they have. Where again, one of their guys, Yaroslav Niagu, 7 foot guy, doesn't play much, but when he's in the game, according to the metrics, they try to give him the ball every single time, because they're like, hey, 7-footer, give it to him, just like we kind of do with Kyle Filipowski at times. So it's going to be an interesting matchup when their taller guys check into the game. But yeah, the fact that they're tall is one of those things where, some of the things that we haven't done well lately, or that we've had an emphasis on, rebounding, for example, those are going to need to be on point.
Yeah, so let's get to the advanced metrics, and then we will discuss the tall guys on their team. As I mentioned, they're a fairly decent team, 115th in KenPom. They are better on defense than they are on offense. And it's worth noting, the very first thing that should jump out to you as you look at the advanced metrics on this team is that this is a good prep for Duke playing Virginia. And by that, I mean, this is a team that plays super slow. Charlotte is 337th in the country in their pace of play, and they play slow on both offense and defense. It's a team that doesn't mind grinding it out and taking time to get just the right kind of shot. They are a good shooting team, Donald. almost all of their starters know good shots and take efficient shots. Their 2-point field goal percentage, Charlotte as a team, is top 60 in the country. They're not as good from outside. They only hit about 32% of their three-pointers. But they don't take a lot of threes. They're like bottom 100 in the country at three-point rate. This is a team that knows what it does well and doesn't do what it doesn't do well. They protect the ball pretty nicely. They have a low turnover percentage. They're an outstanding free throw shooting team, better than 78% at the free throw line. That's a big number. The one thing they don't do well on offense is they don't offensive rebound, like at all. Like they grab 21% of their missed shots. That's 300,
which is considering again how tall they are, is kind of a surprise.
Yeah. But they're 340th in the country. Again, like 365 teams, they're 340th in the country at offensive rebounding rate. I mean, like, wow, that is really bad. And they don't get to the free throw line a lot. So, all these things I was saying that they're good at, I mean, they're good. They're like top 60 or so. But when you combine that with terrible offensive rebounding and a team that, doesn't get to the free throw line, so they don't get easy points in that way, you get a team that's only like average offensively among all the teams in the country. As I said at the start, they're a little better on defense than they are on offense. They're a very good defensive rebounding team. Yeah, I guess they don't even try for offensive rebounds, but when they try for defensive rebounds, they get them. They do a nice job of contesting shots, and their opponents only hit about 31% of their three-pointers, only about 45% of their two-point shots. Those are both pretty good numbers, and that should be a formula for a really, really strong defense. But they're just average at blocking shots. They don't tend to get a ton of steals. They don't force a lot of turnovers. That's why their defense is like, top 80, top 90 in the country. Donald, as you mentioned, big team, 16th tallest team in the country, according to Ken Pomeroy. That's because they have a pair of 6'10 plus guys who play side by side for like more than 30 minutes per game. Those guys are Deshaun Jackson and Igor Milicic, and both of them are pretty beefy. Jackson weighs 260 pounds as a big kid. I mentioned Milicic. He by the way, folks may remember him. He didn't play a lot, but he started out at UVA, and he's turned into a really nice player since he transferred to Charlotte. He's averaging better than 13 points per game, 9.5 rebounds per game this year for them. He also gets a few assists, but the big thing that sticks out to you for a big guy who gets a lot of rebounds, dude reigns from the outside. 46.7, almost 50% from three. Milicic, do not let the man shoot. I will mention, Donald, this is important, and then I'm going to let you do some other stuff about the other players. But Milicic was only about a 35% three-point shooter in previous seasons, so maybe there's some reversion to the mean thing happening here. Maybe he's close to 50% right now, but by the end of the season, if he's only going to be about 40%, then he's got some misses coming in him. So, that's kind of my initial take on the advanced metrics. I know we got a lot more to say about the players, so go ahead and talk about some more of these guys.
Yeah, real quickly on Milicic, and I'm going to pronounce it. You said Milicic. I don't think that's wrong, but I'm just going to pronounce it Milicic because I go back to my dark old days for the Pistons and it's the similar.
Wait, what was the difference in Milicic or Milicic?
Yeah. So I think you might be right.
Go with Milicic. That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. But anyway, I think the one thing that you mentioned, Jason, that again, he's a tall guy, he's beefy, he gets a lot of rebounds. Like I said, you mentioned that they're not a really good rebounding team, especially on the offensive side, but he pulls down a lot of them. And the fact that he can still shoot from three, and he's the guy I think that far outpaces their team. He's the guy that he's not going to shoot a ton of threes, but when he does, it seems like they're going in more often than not, or close to more often than not. I think the other guy you got to look at is Lucy Patterson, 14.9 points per game. He's the guy that leads their team in scoring, but also helps assist, and he's very good on defense. He steals he gets almost 2 steals a game, and this is the team that doesn't steal the ball that much. So between their big guys and their perimeter guys, they're going to try and pressure us into trying making bad decisions with the ball or taking bad shots. The great thing is we have some good rebounders, and they need to step up. We need to have a team rebounding effort because, again, if we're going to miss shots, we're going to start out cold, then we got to get rebounds, especially against this team, because this team has the guys that are tall enough and wide enough to push you out of the lane and get rebounds, even though they haven't been doing it as well as they normally do this season.
So you mentioned Lucy Patterson. They also have a guy named Jackson Threadgill. Those are the other two guys, in addition to Milicic, who shoot a lot of 3-pointers, and they're both hitting less than 30% from 3 on the season. But again, I looked at previous seasons, and these are both guys, Patterson and Threadgill, who hit better than 35% from long range a year ago. So I was talking about reversion to the mean regarding Milicic. These guys may be in for some good games, because reversion to the mean would tell me that these guys are due to hit a little more, 3-pointers than they should. Last thing I want to mention about them, Donald, we talked about their last game was that, fairly nice win over Stetson. In that game, the 49ers handed out 25 assists, which is a pretty big assist number. That's a really big assist number. And Duke has struggled. Look, if you've listened to this podcast, past few episodes, I've been harping on this. Duke has struggled at preventing teams from getting easy shots. Duke has struggled at stopping opposing teams from putting up big assist numbers. And here we are playing a team that in their previous game, 25 assists is a big, big number. I worry about that. It's going to be interesting to see if Duke has fixed some of the defensive problems we've been having, and if we can prevent Charlotte from getting, good numbers on the assist into the floor. Because if we give up easy shots, this could be another unexpectedly difficult game for Duke.
And let's not try to, climb the trees. Don't send guys into the paint with 4 or 5 guys that are, waiting to sit and try and block your shot when they have better shots that are wide open. Go in there. Yeah. Challenge the guys. That's fine. I'm not necessarily saying don't ever go to the rim, but when you do, make sure your defensive, your 3-point position, your triple threat options, right? You're going to have someone that's open on the wing. You may have someone open on the stretch on the court, far side of the court. Get it to those guys, and hopefully this team has learned that the ball moves faster than a human being ever can. And if they can pass the ball around, they will find themselves in open space with a chance to shoot, or open space to, again, make another pass that will get us into position to make our shots as easy as possible. Because when they're as easy as possible, they go in a lot more. It's common sense. It's science. So let's hope that in the middle of all this, that they're learning that, hey, moving the ball around is where they get the best chance to be dangerous.
Yeah. So last word I'll give on this game, Ken Pomeroy projects that Duke wins this contest 76-62. It is worth noting that he also projects that there's about a 10% chance that Duke loses this game. So have that in the back of your mind. If you're starting to freak out, if this is a 4-point game, close game or something like that, and you're like, what's going on? Ken Pomeroy, the computers say solid 10% chance that Duke doesn't come out of this with a victory. But Donald, as you mentioned at the top, man, it feels like this Duke team's a little bit desperate, and they need something to right the ship. So I certainly hope they do against Charlotte.
First 5 minutes of the game. I want everyone to focus on the first 5 minutes of the game. That is where we have lost the last 2. If we can come out hot the first 5 minutes of the game, maybe we can start to calm down a bit. But I know that tension will rise if that first 5 minutes is just as slow as it was against Arkansas and Georgia Tech.
All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. On the other side, did FSU get screwed? We're going to talk about that in just a moment.
Spoiler alert. Yes.
Why take one vacation with the family when you could take all of them? With Royal Caribbean, you don't just go to the beach. You visit a private island and race down the tallest water slide in North America. You don't just go for a road trip. You ATV and zip line through the jungle. You don't just go somewhere new. You rappel down waterfalls and discover ancient temples. Because this isn't just any vacation. This is all the vacations. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Ships Registry, Bahamas.
We're back from the break, Donald. And, I had like a ton of notes, man, about our previous segment. I didn't have all that stuff memorized. I had a bunch of notes. I got no notes here. But we're going to talk about the bowls. And we're going to start by talking about, I know Duke's playing in the Birmingham Bowl against Troy. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But I want to start with the national playoff. I always want to call it the BCS playoff. It's not the BCS playoff anymore, right? It's
college football playoff.
It's just called the college football, right? It's not the BCS. The BCS is dead and gone. Florida State went undefeated this year. Won every single game on their schedule, playing a Power 5 schedule. They played some decent teams in the non-conference. They beat LSU on a neutral field. LSU's a pretty good team.
Thumped them,
yeah. Concluded their season in the ACC championship game playing a top 15 Louisville club, only gave up 6 points. And when the time came for the college football playoff committee to select the 4 teams to play for a national title, they went, oh, here are 2 teams that lost a game. We're going to rank them ahead of Florida State. And Florida State did not make the playoff. Donald, we heard the tease, and you already gave the answer. The Seminoles got royally screwed, didn't they?
Look, I am a Miami fan. I am a Miami alum, Miami law alum. You know it pains me to say what I'm about to say.
You got no love for Florida State. No love for Florida State, but FSU absolutely deserved to be in the playoff. But also on top of all that, the entire season, until for some reason, 13 guys or whatever it is in Grapevine, Texas decided to change their mind. They were one of the best 4 teams in college football. 2 of the arguments that have been talked about is the most deserving versus the 4 best teams. And I'm here to tell you that Florida State, actually by losing Jordan Travis, may have proved that they're one of the best 4 teams in America. Well, wait. I want to hear more about that. Why? You think that the fact that they lost their star quarterback shows that they're that good, huh? Because they kept on winning?
Because they kept on winning and they beat Florida, who I'm pretty sure, checks notes, is in the SEC, and then won the ACC championship game with their 3rd-string quarterback. Jason, you know the 2 teams that probably got screwed the most out of this whole ordeal in the ACC was us and Florida State? Guess who were on their 3rd-string quarterbacks this year, at least at some point? Both of those 2 teams. And I think the depth shows that, hey, maybe not necessarily losing Jordan Travis. We saw him play. He's tremendous. And honestly, if he hadn't gone down, he might have been on his way to New York City as one of the finalists for the Heisman, like maybe been the 5th Heisman finalist. But the reason he got hurt, it's tragic. And the most heartbreaking part of all this, I'm kind of skipping to the end of this, is that he came out after all this and said he wished he had broken his leg earlier in the season so they would have shown that it wouldn't have affected his team. And I think that's just, if you have somebody come out and say, in a team sport, they talk about how there's a team sport where you're supposed to win everything. And if you win everything, you get the chance to play longer. In this college football playoff, you have a guy saying he wished he had broken his leg earlier in the season because he hurt his team by breaking it when it did. Like, that's terrible. You can't have an explanation come down to a team game where this guy says, oh, well, that guy right there, he hasn't been playing last 2 weeks, so this team's not as good. And keep in mind, Jason, even after Jordan Travis went down, they were still being ranked in the top 4 until the very last poll.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead. I got a bunch of things to say about this. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you.
But please go ahead.
I'm going to tell you why Florida State is not in the playoff. You ready? They can blame the Georgia Bulldogs.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why. When Georgia lost to Alabama, the committee clearly felt, well, we have to take Alabama. And I don't disagree with that. The Alabama's victory over Georgia on a neutral field is probably the most impressive victory by any team in all of college football this season. So they went, well, we got to take Bama. But if you're going to take Bama, you got to take Texas. Texas beat Bama. I mean, Bama has 1 loss. Their loss is to Texas.
That was the best game. That was the best win in college football.
Yeah. The only win that rivals the win that Alabama had is the win that Texas has over Alabama. So I think it was a 2-for-1 switch. That once they had to take Alabama, they also had to take Texas. They couldn't take one of those and leave the other one at home. And they were not going to leave Alabama at home after it had defeated Georgia. And so the numbers crunch hit Florida State and they went, who can we possibly drop out? It has to be Florida State. That was the only team that there was any chance they could drop them out. And they came up with this excuse about the 3rd-string quarterback and all this other kind of stuff. But I'm going to call complete BS on all of this because what they essentially were saying was, we're trusting our eyes. We're trusting the eye test, the talent test, as opposed to the results that we've seen on the field. Because even without Jordan Travis, Florida State was still winning games. They may not have looked super impressive, but they were winning games and their defense looked unbelievable. I mean, that's a good Louisville club that they just, I mean, Louisville could do nothing. I mean, nothing against them. So the committee went ahead and said, we're testing the eye test as opposed to the results. Well, if that's the case, why isn't Georgia in the playoff? Are you telling me that if you put Georgia and Washington on a neutral field, Georgia wouldn't be favored? We all know Georgia be favored by 7 points over Washington, easy.
Jason, that's where the eye test part, that's where none of this makes any sense. Is because, one, if you're checking about the eye test, I'm pretty sure, a week before, Florida State was beating the pants off of Florida, and Alabama needed a miracle 4th and 31 touchdown against Auburn to win that game. So the eye test doesn't pass muster. But also, again, just like you said, if we're talking about they were saying we want the best 4 teams. The best 4 teams in this country include Georgia. The only reason Georgia wasn't in is because they didn't win their conference title. And the fact that they ranked Georgia, if they had ranked Georgia 5th and said Florida State was 6th, okay, you know what? Like, I don't like it, but at least you're staying consistent. But the fact is, they wanted it to come down to Alabama and Florida State, and they want to say the eye test is what got Alabama in. But really, look, Jason, I also want to use this to call out some people, and that the people is really Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner. Because you know who I heard for the last 2 weeks on TV every single day, several times a day, was the SEC commissioner about how the SEC needed to have one of those teams in the playoffs. And they weren't talking about Georgia, because if Georgia won, they absolutely would have been in. And you know who else would have been in? Florida State. Because Alabama beat Georgia, they knew that they had a possibility for the SEC to be shut out of this. And the SEC was out there riding the campaign trail for 2 weeks. And you know who was absent from that? Jim Phillips. ESPN was feeding into it during the ACC championship game. Joe Tessitore is calling the game, and at the same time saying that the team that he is calling the game on the field for should not be in the playoff that they are going to be announcing the next day. That's a problem. And Jim Phillips needed to be front and center, be like, yo, we got beef. The other thing, Jason, I know I'm ranting, but I'm giving back to you a second.
Before you rant, because I want to follow up on what you just said.
Yeah.
One of my notes I have on this is that I think this accelerates the demise of the ACC. If you're Florida State and you go,
that's the worry.
We go undefeated in the ACC and it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't put us in the playoff. That accelerates the feeling that the ACC is a second-tier conference, that we do not belong on par with the others. And if you're a Florida State and a Clemson, this is your absolute panic. Now, I know that the playoff goes to 12 teams, and there's probably going to be room for more. The ACC champion is going to go when it's a 12-team playoff, the ACC champion is going to go every single year. But if you're thinking about getting a second team in or something like that, can we play in the ACC championship game, lose, and still make the playoff maybe? Well, now you're getting into the politicking, the campaigning, and the reputation of the conference. And this absolutely, the ACC is now the only power conference in history to produce an undefeated champion who did not play for the national title. And I agree with you. Some of that is on Jim Phillips.
Jason, the other thing and this kind of leads into the fact that this is a big problem for the ACC is this. The ACC had a winning record against the SEC this year, 6-4, all the teams. And 2 of them were Florida State. Florida State beat Florida and they beat LSU. 2, the ACC had a winning record against the Big Ten, 4-3. We had one of those wins against Northwestern. Duke did, right? So we as a conference, people, and this is a down year for the SEC. They were talking about Alabama all year as about how they had lost it. They even tried to, Texas was worried that they were going to get, kind of knocked down a little bit because people were even playing down the fact that they beat Alabama at Alabama. And that wasn't until Alabama got good towards the end of the season that win became part of the conversation again. But the real thing, Jason, is this. Did you take a look at the final standings for the college football playoff?
Tell me what you saw, baby.
The top 12 teams, Jason, the only team as of next year that would not be in the Big Ten or the SEC in the top 12 was Florida State. That is the biggest problem, is that even in a 12-team playoff, if they're going to take the top 12 teams, yeah, sure, the ACC is going to get one in there, but
they ain't getting 2.
They ain't getting 2, they ain't getting 3, and they ain't getting 4. And the problem with all this is, and I know this kind of it's gonna bleed into the Duke part. this set the ACC all the way back from the top to the bottom when it came to our bowl placements, because all of our bowl placements got
Everyone
messed
got
up.
knocked down.
We lost a ton of money because we didn't get 2 teams into the New Year's 6 bowls. We didn't get one to the playoff. We didn't get Louisville into the ACC. We lost the ReliaQuest Bowl as a result because we couldn't put Louisville in there, and it led to a whole scramble that led to Notre Dame, who ties into our conference when it comes to bowl placement, getting sent to the Sun Bowl by draw from a hat. That is a huge thing. And that's where I say Jim Phillips needs to answer for this, because he messed up a lot of people in the conference. And you know what? You know who else I'm going to give blame to? Boo Corrigan. Because Boo Corrigan, the NC State athletic director, was the head of the college football playoff committee. That's a problem when your own conference is shutting you out and then turning around and getting the scraps that you were going to get. They get placed in a bigger bowl as a result of Florida State not making the playoff. It's a problem. It's a big problem.
Yeah. Hey, preach, baby. So let's very quickly, what do you want to say about the Birmingham Bowl and Duke's game against Troy? The only thing I'm going to say about this is there's a really interesting dichotomy happening here. It is entirely possible that the head coach of Troy, Pat Sumrall, might be the next head coach at Duke.
Yes.
He is apparently, look, Duke is doing a really good job of not leaking anything, of not having any names out there. But the little tiny leaks, the tiny, rumors and the such that are out there is that Pat Sumrall's one of the contenders to be the head coach at Duke. I wonder if he, would he coach Troy and then walk across the field when the game's over? Or, how would that work?
I don't think it works that way.
Yeah, no.
No, but I think when it comes to this bowl, even, again, going back to the last part we were just talking about, the way we ended up in this bowl was a partially result of Florida State not making the playoff. And that is that, remember, and also it was, because Mike Elko decided to leave and Riley Leonard and some other players decided to transfer. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about going to the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and everybody was basically saying Duke is slotted in. There's going to be a great matchup. And it's going to be Duke versus Kentucky or Duke versus Auburn or someone like that from the SEC. The SEC, mind you, didn't even, because of all this, and they got 4 teams into the New Year's 6 Bowl, they didn't even get a chance to field a team for the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Duke's Mayo Bowl got West Virginia from the Big 12 as a result. But I digress. I think the one thing about this is that because of all of these things that happen, it pushed Duke all the way down to the bottom of the pecking order. And bowls were fighting over the teams like NC State, UNC, Notre Dame, and Clemson. And because of that, we were left to figure out what was next. And Jason, at one point, as you know, and some of you guys out there know, they had announced that we were going to the Gasparilla Bowl to face UCF.
Yeah.
You're probably saying this is a repeat episode. Yes, it would have been, because last year we faced UCF in the Military Bowl. And once they realized that was going to be the matchup, the ACC then switched us with Georgia Tech. That's how we ended up in the Birmingham Bowl against the Troy team, who, as you mentioned, Pat Sumrall, one of the many people being mentioned as candidates, but one who people think is one of the quote finalists for the position. Also, Troy went 11-2, beat App State in the Sun Belt. They are 2 hours away from Birmingham. They will have fans there. But for me personally, I'm going to the game. So anyone who's there, DBR Podcast at gmail.com, let us know if you're coming to the game. I will figure out a way to meet up with each and every one of you. Birmingham, as you know, Jason, I think you know this, but my mom was from there. So I have not been back since she passed. So this is kind of a homecoming. I used to go to Birmingham all the time as a kid. So this will be a homecoming source for me. So I'm excited about that part. What I'm not excited about is that Duke, because of a lot of things that were out of its own control, ended up here as opposed to a better bowl. And I don't want to disparage the Birmingham Bowl, but we could have been going to Charlotte, where more of our fans would have been able to attend instead of 2 days before Christmas. I think the ACC really messed us up in that regard as well. And again, even putting us in the Gasparilla Bowl, and then figuring out that we were going to face the team we faced last year, and for that to stick for a while until someone decided to switch it, I'm sure it created a lot of angst amongst the team, right? I'm not worried about necessarily fans at that point. The team was probably told one thing and then told another, and they're like deja vu, right? We've just been through this, so just give us what is real. But what's real is we're facing a really tough Troy team. And like I said, Jason, we can't necessarily prepare for Pat Summerall yet because we may not have to. We may take that out of their hands.
All right, let's move on to our final topic just really quickly. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it is still speculative and it's just kind of a wild, crazy situation. But the NCAA has proposed a way to maybe take back control of the wild, wild west that is NIL payments to college athletes. The proposal from the, it's like the study group or something like that. There's some committee. I don't even know what they're all called.
Working committee. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever. One of those things that the NCAA does where they spend a lot of time and money and usually come up with a solution that kind of go, oh, what is this? Anyway, the what is this solution they've come up with now is that they're going to create a separate subdivision of Division I. Teams will be able to opt in or opt out. And if you are a member of that separate subdivision, you will be pledging to spend, you will essentially purchase the name, image, and likeness rights from your players, and you will be pledging to provide those players with $30,000 each. Now, it's worth noting that ostensibly that money is supposed to be to help them pay for educational expenses, but there's really no formal restriction on what they do with that money. You are allowed to pay more than $30,000. You're allowed to divide it up differently by sports or by position and things like that. So there's a provision that would, essentially you're allowed to, as a school, pay more money to the quarterback than you do to the running back, than you do to the swimmer. But you do have to pledge to make those payments to at least 50% of your college, of your sport, of your athletes, not just football and basketball athletes, but all athletes. And there have to be equal payments, at least this is my understanding, to male and female athletes. So if you commit to pay $500,000 to the star recruit for the football or basketball team, you're going to have to find a way to spend $500,000 on women's sports athletes as well because of Title IX. This is all in very early stages. This is all very complicated. There are a lot of different aspects of it. But this is, Donald, significant because this is the NCAA essentially embarking down the path of sharing revenue with the athletes, because, by the way, the conferences that are going to do this, the teams that are going to do this, are the big budget teams. I mean, frankly, if you're a team in a smaller conference, you can't afford to give $30,000 to half your athletes. There's just no way your program has that kind of a budget. So that's number one. And number two is this is a path toward the NCAA and these schools actually having these athletes as employees. And let's face it, that's where they've been for a while. There's functionally not a huge difference in playing in the NBA, playing in the NFL, and playing college basketball or football. You still do a ton of practice. You still have, unbelievable facilities. Your games are all televised, blah, 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 blah. We can go on and on about it. There have been a number of efforts to get athletes declared employees. It would open them up to benefits, especially medical health benefits, which could be really, really important. It would open them up to potential like pensions and money down the line. And most important, and most importantly, it opens them up to the notion of being paid fairly based on what they earn for these schools. So this is a huge, huge step in that direction. What are your thoughts on it?
I think it's a step. I don't know if I would call it huge, and here's why. I think once again the NCAA is coming in with an idea that is far obsolete in some ways, and I say that to say 30,000 ain't gonna cut it, right? Like $500,000 is not going to cut it. When you're talking about paying $500,000 to the star quarterback, we're hearing quarterbacks are getting multiple millions of dollars, right? We're hearing guys, even on the women's side, right? We're talking about, women's sports. And I think women's athletes, there's some women's athletes that are making more than some of the men, right? Like, Paige Beckers and some of those are getting, Nike contracts from NIL. So I'm not necessarily worried about that. I'm worried about the fact that some of these players are going to say, hey, that's not enough. Like, you guys are in this conference. I'm actually getting pigeonholed and not getting the money that I think I would, because you guys have to spend it in a certain way. Whereas, if I go to the Wild Wild West that is right now, I can sell myself to the highest bidder if I want to. I think the other thing is that the NCAA really hasn't they really just haven't embraced, as you mentioned, the fact that they should just declare them employees and let people do what they may. And if you're the school, I mean, think about it. The school probably, a lot of these schools may say yes, they may have the market for it, but they may not want the budget. They may not want to spend X amount of million on just players. They may want, just like for coaches, right? We've heard about some of these schools where the boosters come in and they pay the money to the school earmarked to pay the coach. The school's not raising money through tuition or through, Iron Dukes, for example, to pay the football coach. That's through boosters and through donors. And so the school's probably going to be like, wait, that's actually going to cost us more money because now we have to get everybody to pay to the school fund when they and then distribute it equally when they could, these boosters may just go, why can't I just pay this guy myself? And if you think about, Jason, my last point in this is, like I said, 30,000 is not enough. We've seen backup kickers get, $80,000 from some random thing to basically sign a couple autographs. We've seen, again, some women's basketball players, some women's golf players already in commercials, nationwide commercials, where they're making a lot of money. I think the one thing that's going to sell them short is that this proposal just may not be enough once again, and we're still going to have the Wild West.
Yeah, I agree. This isn't the solution, but this is at least a step in maybe the right direction. People more learned than me can come up with the answer because at the moment at least
they're thinking about it. I just think, again, they may be a year. Like if this had been proposed 2 years ago, maybe we would have gotten somewhere and we would have started to kind of rein this in a way. But they already, the toothpaste is out of the tube and they're saying, hey, we have a whole new toothpaste tube right over here that you guys can do. And people are like, nah, man, we got this over here. That's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah. Again, I don't know that this is the final. In fact, I'm pretty sure this is not the final version of this that we're going to see, but at least the NCAA has taken its head out of the sand for a moment. Because frankly, for the past 2 years, the head has been in the sand and there's been a whole lot of crazy stuff going on. And they've had no control over it. They've had no desire to get involved in it other than, to merely say, oh, well, we don't know what we're doing. Congress, can you help us out? Maybe this is at least, an initial step by the NCAA to try and fix some of this. Boy, let me tell you, by the way, we haven't gotten into it on this podcast. Folks, if you're really interested in this whole issue, read about some of the lawsuits that are going on right now. There's some folks suing schools, conferences, and the NCAA, for past NIL wages and for rights to be employees and all kinds of stuff like that. Stuff that could be seismic and could be judgments in the hundreds, if not hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. This could be the NCAA is treading on very, very thin ice at the moment. So at least they're trying something. Final word, anything else, Donald? Or are we all done?
I think hopefully if this does lead to something positive, I hope, and I was talking about this the other day, I hope it leads to a situation where as a fan and as a alum of and a fan of the teams, that I can just give my money to one place and it be distributed to the places where I needed to, instead of, the annual fund and then Iron Dukes and then this collective and then that collective and then this website and that website. That's where maybe consolidating this, where it's like, hey, our money's going to one place, it's going to get used, and here's how it's being distributed amongst these players. I think a lot of people who donate to these collectives aren't necessarily in it. Most of them are not necessarily in it to support one player. They're in it to support a team or a collective of teams. And I hope that this is where we're getting to, where at least we kind of hone in, and instead of me being hit up 50 times, just ask me to donate to one place, and then and then you can figure out how to distribute it. That's your job.
There you go. All right, that's going to wrap it up on episode 566 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. As Donald mentioned very quickly earlier in the show, we love to hear from all of you. Send us your emails, dbrpodcast@gmail.com, and we will be back with you either when Duke announces a new head football coach, or if there's other big news, or when the Duke Blue Devils play the Charlotte 49ers over the weekend on Saturday. We'll come back at you after that. Until then, he's Donald. I'm Jason. This is the DBR Podcast. And you know what this is? Right now you hear him. That's a Duke band. They're playing you out and taking us home.
Also, are you in a suit?
No, I'm just in a jacket. I wear this when I appear on television doing movie reviews. I've been doing movie reviews for Channel 11 NBC affiliate here in Atlanta. It's just for their online stuff, but I try to look kind of nice when I do that. So
nice.